Hello, everyone. Welcome to Filecoin Core Devs call number 70. Today is, the meeting is happening Friday, 3rd May 2024, but where I am in the world, it is just 8:03 p.m. and it's 2nd May 2024. We have just one item on the agenda today, practical fast retrieval on Filecoin, and ZX will be taking that conversation. We'll have time for Q&A and closing. If there is anything else anyone would like to discuss or quickly raise, feel free to flag that, and we can consider having additional conversations, time permitting us. Without further ado, I will hand it over now to ZX.
Thank you. I just wanted to take this opportunity to kind of share some rationale behind the starting this discussion. And I think we had some productive discussion with the FuelOS team, and then maybe some open questions that we still have. And then we would like to get some feedback from other core dev too around on the direction and trade-offs. Next, please. And then so background is after speaking to many miners, investor users, right? I think one of the biggest challenges of the Filecoin network to deliver value is still expensive to retrieve data stored on Filecoin. I think historically the approach is we just ask people to store an extra copy, but I don't think that has cut it because one, there's an additional cost and operation, and then two, it's also independent from the core Filecoin protocol in the sense that people, if retrieval is relying on just storing extra copy, people can technically store and copy with or without Filecoin. And then right now there are L2s building on Filecoin as hot storage layers, but technically the L2s, they don't have to back up onto Filecoin. And then especially when it's hard to retrieve, even after you back it up to Filecoin. And also the go-to-market and fundraising for L2s on Filecoin can be quite challenging. So if L1 itself is slow in retrieving, right, the argument to use Filecoin as a back-end value accrual for Filecoin can be quite weak. And even though I think it's useful for L2s now to bootstrap through grants or contracts or access to Filecoin developers or miners, but at some point without a strong improvement to the L1, I don't think the value proposition to L2 is strong enough. Next, and then I also realized a lot of the Filecoin DeFi and staking also depend on retrieval to work to a large extent. The reason is if we want people to participate in DeFi and staking, but to participate in those, right, people needs to be bullish on Filecoin as a network and as a token in the first place, right? Because it's the 10, 20%, 30%, 8%, whatever percentage of yield doesn't matter if people are not bullish on Filecoin itself. And unfortunately, a lot of the confidence was lost in the past 2 years, right? It's still a good idea to curb inflation, but I think that boat might have sailed for now. So that's why I think fixing making Filecoin actually usable it's actually one of the biggest blocker for DeFi and staking too. But however, many parties, people want to believe in the Filecoin story and the Filecoin narrative and want to see Filecoin working. But I don't think Filecoin has unlimited time to realize that. So all this are the kind of the forces that increases the urgency and priority of fixing fast retrieval, and that's why I started this discussion. I don't really have proposal that could work yet. And I call it practical more so because I'm trying to find a practical solution that can be live soon. Next, Lucky. So there are some insights. So I think as a reflection, right, the retrieval speed today is an outcome of design trade-off, right? We technically don't have to be slow. That's kind of where my realization was when I think of this naive proposal. If we just simply naively reducing the number of layers, but of course the cryptography team tells me that it doesn't work, but we can go, but I think it's still valuable to align on the requirements. So I think the first one is like, I do think time to market is key, where ideally within the next 2 upgrades, including like R&D time and also like building conviction and validation that such a change will move the needle. I also want to avoid shaking its existing business model so that we can minimize social consensus building time so that we can reach a positive sum outcome for the whole ecosystem. And then ideally, such a change will also reduce hardware requirement for participation, increase number of new participants into the network, and then also increase demand for Filecoin tokens. So then I think people talk about, like, I thought would be good to add a slide about why do we care about space hardness, and then what about like just the proof of stake L1. Here's my view on this. And here's my view on this and why we care about space hardness and not just like going straight to entire POS L1. But I think the general argument are twofold. One is like, if we were to compete as yet another POS L1, it's very challenging. You have very fierce competition with Ethereum, Polygon, Polkadot, and Solana. And I don't think we are set up to win in that competition. And then I think the second thing is one of the biggest advantage of Filecoin right now, even today, right? You have like new project or new ecosystem trying to reach out. I think a big part of the reason is there's still a lot of hardware dedicated to Filecoin and awareness. And I think the hardware dedication comes from space hardness, because Filecoin is a network being built from like proof of useful work, being built from verification of resources dedicated. So I think it's also important to recognize our ecosystem is still very tiny now, even though people want to believe in the narrative. So I think the key is to still just win at our own game and become like a leading network for decentralized cloud services. If you will care more about space hardness, I'm not the best person to talk about it, but I think there are plenty of experts on the core dev team. So where we are right now, looking at the discussion on the FIB and then discussion with like with other core dev, especially in Phil's team, I think like what people are kind of, it's also coincidence that like Phil's team is also thinking a lot in this direction. It seems that what we are converging on is like proof of data possession, where we create a new pathway to prove there's a clear data copy, a clear unsealed copy, independent of the rest of the protocol. So I think the benefits are it's opt-in for users, lower higher requirement, we remove the cost of unsealing in retrieval. A potential disadvantage is, I think it's still weak connection to Filecoin protocol and token flow. But I think there are also 3 other options that I think people decided to drop. One is like the naive reducing SDR layer. 2 is proof of access, window post and winning post. But I think any of this, they are still insufficient in delivering fast retrieval itself. And that's why there's still a need for L2 for last mile delivery and setting up the incentives to further incentivize actual retrieval. So like people, if you're watching this on recording, feel free to contact CEL for any kind of collaborations here. But the claim is with PDP is a necessary step in bringing Filecoin closer to fast retrieval and create a stronger symbiotic relationship between L1 and L2. Otherwise, L2 has very little reason to depend on Filecoin. So next, so we still, I think even on the discussion on that we're still having now with you all and among ourselves, we still have the following question that we don't have a very crisp answer yet. Would like to get input from anyone on like to help us better answer these questions. So I think one is like, given that PDP doesn't guarantee retrieval or other similar mechanisms that we can think of so far, and then like the ultimate reason is there's no proof of retrieval. But then the question is, why does PDP mean retrieval will work on Filecoin? What's our reasoning? I think so far the strongest reasoning is, at the very least, it remove the cost of unsealing to service retrieval. And cost of unsealing is quite expensive because of the nature of the current programs. And then the second question we also want a stronger conviction on is like, does PDP really make L2 and other projects more dependent on Filecoin, and how, right? And I think that was one of the bigger motivation that motivated this, which is the realization that if L1 can't do any retrieval in any form, there's very little reason for a hot storage layer to depend on Filecoin. And then does PDP really move, as it is right now, really move the needle for Filecoin? Right, one of our assumption or hypothesis now is maybe we should have stronger connection between PDP and the core Filecoin protocol and token flow. And then should L1 incentivize PDP through block rewards, and why? Is it for go-to-market? Is it for subsidizing costs? Even though arguably the cost of PDP, the hardware cost of PDP is way smaller than like ProRep. And then what are some heuristic or principle that this incentive should abide by, and why, right? So right now we are still trying to come up with some first principle answer of why we should do that here. And then lastly, like, does the value get accrued to Filecoin L1 and Filecoin token as PDP adoption increases, and how, right? Like, and also, can we do this without creating a big hindrance to adoption? So these are some of the questions that we don't have a good answers for. We love input thoughts from like core dev or community participants. Feel free to I might just link this question in the FIP discussion. But feel free to drop your comments and thoughts. Cool. Now
I think we have a question in the chat box when you have a moment.
Yeah.
Oops.
So George's question is, are we not in competition with proof of stake networks anyway? Does the proof of useful work or storage provide a differentiator that shields us from competition? In other words, does user really value the difference? Note that I'm not asking about storage functionality, which could be implemented separately from the consensus itself. So I do think, like, at least based on what I gather from talking to various projects that try to adapt Filecoin or Filecoin miners or Filecoin developers, and like, I think the biggest reason why people still approach us or our community today, given like a shrinking network, many participants might be leaving, I think it's still because of the hardware and the people, right? Like, and the reason why we are amassing such amount of hardware, I think a big part of that is there's proof on there's actual unique hardware dedicated. There's some representation of that. Well, you can say that, okay, sure, maybe we run consensus separately and then use incentivized storage hardware differently, but that might still require space harnesses. So I'm just saying, there's a very nuanced point here, which is like, if we are trying to compete or brand us like I'm competing as an L1, then I think the competition is very fierce. Like, you can have like at least 5 other L1s playing the same game with like many years ahead of us with a whole ecosystem and tooling. Yep, Steven.
You can also sorry. You can also have multiple independent ways of earning block rewards or earning rewards, where you could basically separate out the proof of stake and the proof of space time. But like, while technically really our security is derived from proof of stake, the proof of storage still adds, like, you still need to actually run an SP, and it adds a barrier to entry, which does sort of put us in a different category from just standard proof of stake chain. One thing I do want to note though is, like, so we don't waste any time on this, like, there is no world where we can reduce the number of layers in SDR. Like this, basically, this wasn't a trade-off in terms of like, well, let's make it more secure, less secure. This is the threshold to make it secure. So we can't just like make it less secure. It'll just be not secure, unfortunately. And I believe that was like, there are 2 security models. I think this was in the cost security model. In the time security model, you have a little bit more flexibility. You can say, oh, you just like require faster proving, but we found a bunch of issues with that, where like it didn't work out, so we had to go with the cost model, and that's why it isn't really a trade-off. But yeah, there are definitely other ways of doing fast retrieval. This is a project that a lot of people have been working on for many years now, actually. This is not something new. But yeah, and also in general, you cannot prove the data is retrievable. You can prove that it is there. You can prove that the SP can access it, you cannot really, well, you can, with third-party validators, prove that the SP is willing to serve the data, at least to someone, but that requires like a validator network and stuff like that, which is a bit tricky. Other than that, like the whole idea of proof of data possession is basically, okay, let's ensure that SPs at least have the unsealed data. The unsealed data is not corrupted, and therefore, like the delta between them having it and actually giving it away is rather minimal. Where right now, what can happen is like, even if SPs store it, it can get corrupted, or they decide, you know what, like it's too much cost to store it and throw it away, and there's no real penalty there. So the idea of like proof of data possession, at least that solves that side of it. But yeah, sorry, I just wanted to give you those other perspectives. I don't have any core or any like complete proposal because no one really knows how to solve this. I think we have to sort of chip away at it, basically.
Yeah, no, I think like I'm on the same page with that on like the different assumption on the pull reps, and then like I think like I'm calling it practical doesn't mean the solution is practical. I want something that is more practical given like how long we have spent working on this problem, the whole ecosystem. And I think the urgency comes from like people may not have as much patience for the network to work. And
yeah, but like this is the general like the network needs to work problem. I think like one part of this is also, this is why I've always wanted users to pay for their data, users to pay for deals, because if we can get users to actually pay to store their data, then like that really fixes the flow here, because now users will pick the SPs that are willing to actually make their data retrievable. If SPs don't provide that service, they're not going to pick those SPs. So that like it kind of solves a lot of the incentive problems without entirely relying on the network. We can still use the network and proof of space time, et cetera, to like help bootstrap the system and effectively like incentivize SPs to get a bunch of hard disks and collect all the hardware they need. But then if we can flow money in through the users, that helps basically align the incentives of, or really the needs of the user with the incentives of the SP, instead of sort of going two different directions.
Yeah, so I think one of the bigger challenge there, after like working through like all this like potential L2s and whatnot, I think the go-to-market can be hard.
Mm-hmm.
Go-to-market for L2s can be hard, acquiring making user to pay. But the realization I had is without this type of change on L1, like even I'm an L2, the value proposition to use L1 is not very strong.
For what?
Right?
Use L1 for what?
Even for like if I'm building a hot storage layer, right? Like now the value prop of Filecoin to this hot storage layer is, sure, maybe you can back up, but you might not never get it. It's very hard for you to get it, right? So as an L2, then it's like, okay, then why do I want to back up to Filecoin? Especially if a huge if my users are paying me for hot storage, then it's like, do I really care about where I do my code? So that's why I think something it's necessary on L1 to enable this. But I think the good news is even if L1, I think looking at the current technology that what offer is feasible, right? Like the L1 can do all the retrieval stuff on its own because there's no proof of delivery. So that creates room for L2 to fill that gap. And then I think the biggest challenge, I agree with you, user should pay, but the biggest challenge of that is like go to market. And then that could be an argument for L2s launching its own token to incentivize the go-to-market. And then with that, you have a more symbiotic relationship with like the L1 and the L2s.
I think you should really talk to some existing companies that are in the space, because like people are paying SPs to store their data now. Like this is a thing that happens. So like definitely talk to groups like Banyan and Lighthouse and stuff like that. Because like they have systems in place. I don't know how cost effective they are, but this is possible. Like in terms of like ensuring your data is retrievable, that's unfortunately just not really a solvable problem. Where like it's probabilistic. Where like you can try to align the incentives, but it's not just probabilistic. It's
no. So I think like we are in touch with these companies and work with many of them in the ecosystem. I think like the issue, I think there are two. I'm trying to articulate, even if let's say we are building one of the L2s ourselves, right? I think like two main challenges. One is if Filecoin itself doesn't really work, I have no reason to use it practically, right? So
No,
that's why
that's a separate issue, and that's why but that's
correct.
so that's yeah.
That's why we're motivating this. We need to make it
Yep.
work fast so that people can depend on Filecoin, right?
Yep.
There's a second issue is like, sure, I might have some paying customer now, but how recurring that is, how much volume that is, right? Like, can I scale this very quickly? And
Yep.
that's what I mean by go to market for like a few user, and then how long did you take to get those user, right? Like, can we do that
Yep.
even more at
Yeah,
scale?
yeah, but like unfortunately, just providing even a semi decent service is not sufficient for that. We need to actually be different than like S3 and other random services, and that's I think a more important problem to solve. Like I don't know, like, but this is yeah.
Mhm.
Like,
But I think for
me,
purpose,
this is more of a technical problem, less of an incentive problem. But yeah, like I don't see how just like spinning up a new token is going to solve the problem, basically.
no, of course, like I think there's multiple things that solve this problem, but I think for the purpose of discussion in this context would be how can Filecoin become a stronger dependency for other people and project building on top?
Yes, yeah. Well, for that, it needs to provide a unique value proposition, and it needs to work reliably. So one is they're basically, like, from my perspective, they're still both technical issues. The value proposition is actually more of a product issue right now, where we have some technicals, like you see, we have some proposals based on some hypotheses of like how we could make it like actually useful, but there's still a lot more product research that needs to be done there. And then the work better is, from many perspectives, technical. There are many different technical approaches there. This is where this proof of availability, proof of data possession, stuff like that comes in, where at least like we sort of like we reduce that diff between storing the data and then making it available. Another part of this is like having hot storage layers. So this is, I know W3S was looking into this, where like they wanted to have a hot storage layer where like they would be willing to effectively like pay more to get data out of SPs, even if it's sealed, unseal it, or have the SP unseal it, and then store a cache version. But because while unsealing is expensive, it's actually like, if you only do it once in a while, it's really not that expensive. I can't remember the exact cost calculations, but like it's effectively what you have to do is you have to go to a sealing as a service provider, get the key, go to the SP, get the sector, XOR them approximately together, and then you get back at the unsealed data. And the cost of this is like, honestly, I think on the order of the cost of bandwidth, actually. It's still too much too often, especially for the SP, because that basically erases their like the profits they would make on the bandwidth. But it's not actually that expensive if you're only doing it once in a while.
So no, I think like I get that part about W3S, and then we're also working with them as a CER client now. I'm just saying like and potentially some of the others too, right? Like, I'm just saying like on the L1 side, what can we do quickly on the L1 so that we also have confidence that will be useful. And then there are some of the question of, do we care about, should the L1 potentially even incentivize this?
So the thing there that Phil Laws is looking at is basically the proof of data possession, basically proof over the unsealed data in some way. We've talked a lot about actually having three options, where you either have like proof over the sealed data and the unsealed data, proof of the sealed data, or just proof over unsealed data. In terms of incentivizing proof over unsealed data, this is tricky because it's not a proof of space-time, it's a proof of knowledge. So we can't give you power from that. There could be something where you could win an independent reward. And this is why I was talking earlier, where like maybe we split out like basically rewards from like minting blocks and rewards for storing data, and then maybe rewards for basically like for storing unsealed data. There may be some option there. I don't know. That is well beyond my expertise. But it's difficult to make it not gameable. Like, I mean, I guess it would be gameable. You have to make it so that like you might as well store actual data instead of just gaming it. Effectively, like, so this is actually one of Nicholas' points. If you make a lot of this kind of stuff less profitable than just like storing zeros, and then you tack on basically the user's costs, then if you're going to game the system, just store zeros. if you and it only makes sense rationally to, for example, like do this proof of data possession or something like that, if you're storing user data, because you're actually getting lower rewards, but then you're expecting to get some extra from the user to like make up for that. So that is an option. You should really talk to Nick a little more about that.
So, no. So we are page in on that as well. So like we thought about that quite for a bit yesterday and discussed with Nicola yesterday too. But we couldn't articulate. I mean, that's why we have the outstanding questions here. Otherwise, we present you some options already, which is like, we still don't have a. So I think it sounds looking at these few bullets, right? It sounds like the first bullet we have some kind of answer, which is that we're reducing the gap of the cost, right? The biggest gap reduction is like you don't need to do unsealing anymore for retrieval, right? So maybe that will make. I think you can make the claim that you make it less irrational to serve retrievals, but would it make it rational enough? Depends, right? Like, so that one depends on how many clients are paying, right?
It depends on a lot. It's a lot more than that, unfortunately. So like,
it's what?
It's unfortunately it's not. It's not just about bandwidth. It's about like the setup cost of being able to serve retrievals. The like clients who want maybe small pieces of data are not nearly as attractive as clients who want to download the entire sector. It also comes down to like sort of like big clients will be able to like download the sector all in one go reliably. Randos who just want to fetch your sector are likely to accidentally fail somewhere in the middle or download it slowly or whatever to basically cost you more. So this is where things get really complicated, and this is why having hot storage layer really helps, because if you have a hot storage layer in front of this, it means that like the SD is basically like dealing with maybe a couple of well-behaved services, but not random users.
No, so but my point is like I think it'd be helpful to like if we can articulate what this thing is, what exactly is the value prop, so that we understand like why we are building this as a whole ecosystem like quickly. I think quickly why we're building this quickly, right? Like, so even stuff that you said we think will be helpful to align on like why we think this will move the needle for Filecoin. And then, so this is one category of question, right? It's like, even if we do this as it is, why would it make a difference for L2 too, right? Like, why would L2 depend on Filecoin more because of this, right? So I have some notion of the answer. I don't have a very crisp answer yet. So that's why I'm raising them. I'm seeking for someone who's more familiar with the design to actually articulate that better, right? Then the second part about whether we should give incentive, like, you can always give out some rewards, but the question is giving out a reward for what, right? So that's why even we page into what the current this talk that Nicola had, but we don't have a strong answer or a very crisp answer or heuristic, like why should L1 incentivize, right? Like the reason why I'm asking that question is by aligning on the why, that will give us the guiding kind of like behavior of how we want the incentive design to look like, right? And then the next question that I care about is like, how much do we care and how do we ensure value gets accrued to L1, right, as the adoption increases? Because right now, at least in a similar argument to why storing extra copy didn't really move the needle for Filecoin was, I think like one is a separate process, right? Like it's an additional cost in the extra copy. And then two is like, it's still detached from the Filecoin core protocol and value flow. Because if PDP work, technically I can use PDP on, let's say, any other ecosystem as well, right? Like what is the strong connection to Filecoin? And of course, we don't want to create a hindrance to adoption, right? Like, but so there are like some other questions there that we have in mind.
Yeah, before jumping in step, I just wanted to check if there are others who would like to also contribute to this. So it's not just the two of you. Yeah, I just want to make sure if there are others who would like to chime in at this point. Otherwise, I'll just give Steph like 2 minutes to wrap up. No? Okay, Steph, back to you.
I think the argument that I think, well, sorry, I guess the argument I've heard is that basically the proof of storage, or sorry, this proof of space-time brings the storage. So it's the people who are mining Filecoin have the storage that they can then like dedicate towards storing user data. And this is why Nicola always argues for like saying, actually, why do we split it and say you can either store user data and you don't get the block reward, or you store zeros and you get the block reward. We're like, that is actually a viable approach where you can do either or both if you really, really want to. The reason this can make sense is that like you're not always going to be able to completely fill your space with user data. Especially like if you're adding new hard drives, you have some extra space. You use that to sort of like mine Filecoin effectively, and then like ideally the payment you would get from deals is greater than your block reward, so you're more likely to take that, or at least it adds on to it. This is where things get fuzzy. Like it'd be really nice if Filecoin worked the way we initially designed it, where you could just kind of like mix your CC sectors with your data. But yeah, that unfortunately, like it's expensive to unseal. On the other hand, sorry, I take it back. Like that is still a viable option for certain cases. I think a big part there is like the fact that like those flows just aren't very well worked out. Where like basically like in theory it could be economical to unseal. It's just nobody sets up that pipeline because historically it was really, really, really expensive, and it made absolutely no sense, and no one wanted to pay for this, etc. Nowadays with sealing as a service, like in theory, like it actually kind of makes sense. For like literally, like I even as a user could just like say, look, you give me the sealed copy, I will go to a sealing as a service provider and get the key from them, and then mix them together and get out the unsealed data. So like that is technically viable, especially as a backup or like a backup restore option. So it's not entirely unreasonable to still use blockware for that. But yeah, sorry, I'm rambling a bit.
No, but it sounds like, I mean, we don't have answer to this question. That's why I'm asking. It sounds like we don't have an answer to like why we want to incentivize either, because don't get me wrong, we don't have to incentivize it, but like we're just asking whether if we were to, what were their motivation? Like what does
sorry. So like the reason we're looking at PDP is like, yeah, right now like there is no incentive to store this extra copy other than a handshake. Users don't really have that guarantee. And sometimes people are storing it, but like I know that like even when an SP stores this data, it quite often bit rots because they have no reason to actually like store it redundantly. And users are not really willing to pay more for it because there's no proof that's actually going to happen. So this is where there is some incentive, some reason to actually like have this extra proof. Maybe we can get users to pay more for like the extra, like the fact that this data is actually going to be there now. Yeah. On the other hand, like I don't know how the protocol can securely incentivize it in a way that makes sense. That is well outside my area of expertise.
So I think that's why I was thinking some potential reason it's like for subsidizing some kind of cost, right? But again, the hypothesis of PDP is cost is already minimal, right? Like from like a hardware perspective, right? And
the thing is like, actually, from what I understand,
can we wrap up the conversation in 3 minutes, guys? Thank you.
Sorry, one point is like, from what I understand, the majority of the cost is not the hard drive space. The majority of the cost would be, well, okay, fine. It depends on when. For now, the majority of the cost would be the proofs, actually, like continuously proving this data. So if you were to just incentivize basically on a per sector basis, it doesn't actually matter if someone tries to cheat by storing zeros or not. The cost is basically that they might as well store data because the cost of storing data is actually not, that's not the cost center. The cost center is actually doing the proofs. On the other hand, we don't have lots of talks around like potentially combining proofs together to have fewer proofs.
But this is PDP or ProRep? PDP, right? You're talking about
both. So like we've talked about combining a lot of proofs together and saying, okay, maybe you can only do one proof per day, and that would change this entire argument and say, no, the majority of the cost for something like PDP would actually be the storage, because like the cost of actually proving, like if you had all zeros, you would save a lot of cost, if that makes sense.
The cost of PDP is in the disk, not in the compute. You are saying.
Well, so what I'm saying right now, my understanding is the cost would actually be in the gas, really. It's minimal. Effectively, like 32 gigabytes of space on disk over time is not very much. But if I have to then prove Actually, I'm not sure. I really don't know. I may be wrong here.
Great.
I'm probably wrong.
Thank you both. We can take the conversation offline and continue the lovely discussions. It looks like many of us are absolutely enjoying the conversation. But I just want to give additional time for J. Suarez. I don't know if he's still here to talk about F3 and provide quick updates. And hopefully your connection is good now.
Yeah, I mean, it hasn't failed in the last 10 minutes, so hopefully
Fingers
it will
crossed.
stay that way. Yeah, thanks, Lucky. I mean, this will be really a short update. I don't have slides. I do want to share a link to this document, and I realize people don't see it on the recording, but it's our sketch for passive testing of F3 on mainnets, starting with NV23. And by the way, Steph can always add to whatever I say if you think there's something I'm missing. But yeah, so mainly the reason why we wanted to talk about to provide an update today is that there are ongoing discussions about the inclusion of F3 on NV23 and the risks and timeline associated with that. And so we really wanted to explain what our plans are for NV23 in particular. F3 is, as most of you will know, a pretty significant change coming to the Filecoin network. The goal is to bring in fast finality, and the way we're doing that is by basically running a second BFT agreement protocol as a sort of finality gadget on top of expected consensus. So while the protocol in execution will always fall back to EC, and the goal is to never create additional risks to the network. Of course, at the moment of transition of implementation in the network, there is always the risk that there are bugs in the implementation. Or even just misconfiguration at this point. So what we are indeed planning to do is to activate F3 or to deploy F3 over 2 subsequent upgrades. And so in NV23, what we are doing is deploying basically a passive testing version of F3, which would run in parallel with DC, but without linking to it and without influencing its fork choice rule. And so the main goal here is and the reason we can't do this just in a test network is that we want to really collect data at scale on the performance of the algorithm, obviously on the correctness of the implementation, but also on the network and computational performance and on the parameters that we are setting for instance, network propagation time, or even just the proof aggregation time. And so that is basically the plan, right? We deploy it in parallel. It is opt-in by default, so you actually need to opt out if you don't want to run F3, but it will not impact the actual consensus or the block rewards or anything of the sort. It will participate in the F3 consensus mechanism, and we are currently discussing a potential opt-in mechanism to provide metrics to the test effort that, if we do move forward with it, would be opt-in. So, I mean, opt-out by default. No one is providing metrics unless they actively choose to. The plan is to run F3 in this mode for basically an upgrade cycle. During that upgrade cycle, we will be implementing the mechanisms to update the configuration of F3 and also to reset it onto the main chain if it happens to diverge from the EC chain. And so we're still discussing the optimal way of doing this. There's basically a push and a pull approach to this, but the idea is that over the test period, we can continuously update the parameters and try to converge on what will be the optimal set of parameters at the time of activation, which is currently expected to take place with NV24. Key points then, we do believe that this is a low risk upgrade. In practice, like, this is not consensus breaking. It technically doesn't even need to go into a network upgrade. The reason why it is important to go into a network upgrade is that we need it to be deployed at scale, and so it needs to be part of a mandatory release. A second note to that effect is that, of course, for the purposes of testing at scale, we don't actually need all node implementations to participate in this. Obviously, that is the ideal scenario, right? Because it gives us the scale and it gives us the interop and the validation over all different clients. But it is not a strict requirement, and other clients can actually join halfway through the testing by doing optional point releases, or in the worst case scenario, just join at the time of the NV24 integration testing, and so butterfly net and calibration, and eventually NV24 deployments. And yes, I mean, I think that was mainly it. If you are interested in following along with the efforts, we do have a channel in Filecoin Slack. It's Phil-Fasts-Finality. And all of our documents are shared there and linked from the bookmarks there. And yes, I think that was pretty much all I had today. Again, Stephen, if you have something to add, please do.
Thanks. So are you, just to understand, are you saying that this will be deployed over the next 2 upgrades, MV23 and 24?
Yes. So that is the idea. I mean, look, whether it is the next 2 upgrades or other 2 upgrades, it's not strictly my decision. It is a decision of the core devs and implementers. But it is over 2 upgrades. In the first upgrade, it's deployed passively. It will be running on every node again by default, unless people disable it, and it will be tested. This really is a pretty significant change, and we don't want to take any risks. So that's why we're taking this 2-phased approach. Then in the next upgrade, so NV24, if that is the case, we would actually activate it. So that's the moment when it joins the loop with EC, starts actually basically finalizing the EC chain, and EC in turn starts basically deferring or taking into account F3 finalized chains when choosing forks. And so at that point, F3 becomes an integral part of the network, and that's when we actually activate fast finality from the user perspective. So to be clear, with NV23, you will not be getting the immediate benefits of the fast finality. The network will continue working as it does now. So those are the bad news, but in some sense, right? But that's also why we think it's so important to deploy the passive version of F3 in NV23, because this is already a 6-month effort. I mean, it's a 2-cycle effort, and so deploying it as soon as possible will get us fast finality still in 2024, which I think is extremely important for the network. And again, the fact that it's running passively greatly risks the implementation. So we really want to convey the message that people shouldn't worry too much. I mean, we are worried. Obviously, we want it to be correct, but people shouldn't worry too much about the change. In fact, it isn't at this point a bigger change than other FIPS that have been implemented in the past due to the staged deployment. And thanks again for the time, Lucky.
Great, thanks. I mean, even though it's passive deployment, obviously the FIP has to go through the governance process, last call, get accepted before it's then part of the upgrade. So looking at the upgrade timeline, do you think we should consider moving the existing time that we have? Because code freeze, I believe it's May 23rd. That means this has to go into last call in a couple of days.
Yes, I mean, we don't currently expect to be able to meet the 23 May code freeze timeline. We do currently expect to be able to meet the 8 May, so Wednesday next week, the last call timeline. We do have 2 draft FIPS currently in the repo. These haven't been moved to editor review just yet, but we hopefully will do it tomorrow. And we have probably 2 more incoming FIPS. Sorry, not FIPS, PRs. These are all amendments to the same FIP 86, which is the number for F3. And so we do expect to have 2 more PRs further specifying some parts of the protocol early next week. So our plan right now is to abide by the last call timeline. Yes, it's the implementation that at this point is the bigger risk.
I don't know. We still have some design questions,
Okay.
but yeah.
Okay. I mean, yeah. Are there additional comments or questions on this? Great. Anyway, I'll share around the recording and the materials. Also from our side, if anyone will be at the Dev Summit in Brussels, please let us know. I'll share like a form where you can just say yes or no if you're coming or not. I'm thinking about like having a core dev retro session or convening for core devs who will be in person, so we can meet. So look out for that. Yes, Andrew.
I think Magic is coming. I know he's going to one of the things going on in Brussels soon.
Okay.
I don't know exactly what it is.
Okay, I'll share a form where anyone else can just indicate yes or no, I'm coming or I'm not. That way we know how many people we're expecting. But thanks for flagging. However, I'll also be in touch regarding the F3 work, and then consider like, I don't want to, but consider maybe additional changes to the date, just so that we don't have anything surprising last minute. But if there is no need for that eventually, then maybe we don't have to. But I guess the question now is really on implementing this. But fingers crossed we can touch base on this next week and see how far we've gone. All right, thank you everyone for joining, and thank you again. See you next month.